there is a great debate as to what is mutar and what is not mutar to speak about on Shabbat. That really starts from all the way from the time of the Rishonim and Machloket Rishonim, whether or not a person can speak about mundane issues on Shabbat. Can you speak Sichat Chulin? Now, in general terms, in Chazal, there are two terminologies used that they are different than one another, and that is Sichat Chulin and Dvarim Betelim. Dvarim Betelim means just regular idle talk that has no benefit to them. Sichat Chulin could be things that are related to your livelihood, parnasah, things that are perhaps important, but still not words of Torah. Now the Gemara discusses this on a regular basis in Masechet Yuma and of Yutet, even on a regular day-to-day basis. What is mutar to be said, what is not mutar to be said. Kol asach sichat chulin over ba'aseh, over belav, over b'shtehem, and the Kaf HaChaim actually discusses this. These are interesting topics even for a weekday, but for our purposes, discussing Hilchot Shabbat, in the beginning of Siman Shin Zayin, Maran brings this in Bet Yosef and in Shulchan Aruch, and the way this divides itself is very interesting, because Maran writes in Shulchan Aruch, V'daber davar, that we say this actually in Shabbat morning and Kiddush the Sfaradim at the very least, that im tashib mishabbat raklecha, sochzecha, and then say v'daber davar, that you holding back your feet from doing mundane things, and also daber davar, that you're going to speak things that are related to Shabbat. Shelo yeh diburcha shel Shabbat kediburcha shel chol. Here's the Gemara. Again, this is straight up from Masechet Shabbat, Daf Kuf Gimel, that your speech on Shabbat and on weekdays should not be the same, right? Hilkach, says the Shulchan Aruch, Asur lomar davar peloni e'eseh lemachar. Therefore, it's asur to say, I am planning to do such and such tomorrow on Sunday. If that thing is a mundane item, you're not allowed to speak about your plans of a weekday on Shabbat. The stock market is crashing. I'm going to be buying some stocks tomorrow. I'm not doing anything. I'm talking about what I'm going to be doing tomorrow. And yet, says the Shulchan Aruch, is asur to do that. Even in Dvarim Betelim, which again, here the poskim change the girsa, or at least explain this to mean really Sichat Chulin, that even a mundane regular Sichat Chulin is asur laharbot. You can't speak a lot of that on Shabbat either. So that's the Shulchan Aruch. Now the Ramah brings from the poskim, from the Rishonim, who are a little bit more lenient on this. It's known as the Shita of the Trumat HaDeshen. The Trumat HaDeshen, and I read you the language of the Ramah. This is the Trumat HaDeshen in Siman Samech Aleph. Uvnei Adam shesipur shmuot v'divrei chidushim hu oneg lahem. If you're one of those that hearing the news, Chadashot, is a real ta'anug, you enjoy speaking about what's going on in the world, and news, right? Things that are relevant to the world and what's happening and so on. If you enjoy that, mutar lesapram b'Shabbat kemo bechol. You could speak about those on Shabbat, just like Yemot Chol. Aval mi she'eno mit'aneg. But if you don't enjoy it, then it's asur for you to say it, even if you're trying to do a hesed because the next guy enjoys it, and you want to talk. If you don't enjoy it, you have no heter. It's a very specific heter. Trumat HaDeshen says Maran Chida in Machzik Bracha, and this is brought by Rabbi Elisha Dingur, the Rosh HaRabbanim of Baghdad, in the Sefer Kedulot Elisha, and Kaf HaChaim, others as well, that Maran, who doesn't bring this in Shulchan Aruch, he is cholek on this. He disagrees. He does not agree that this is the halacha, because Maran paskins like Rabbeinu Tam. According to Rabbeinu Tam, speaking of mundane talk like this on Shabbat is asur. You enjoy it, keep it for tomorrow. Today is Shabbat, right? You're going to be learning, you're going to be doing other things. The Sfarim HaKadoshim bring that Rashbi, Rabbi Shlomo Yisraeli, when he was with his parents, his mother would talk about mundane talk, right? He would say Shabbat Hayom, right? Ima, today's Shabbat, and she would get the hint. She would stop speaking about it. Again, this is brought also in Kafachayim and others. This is the Tosafot actually in Masachat Shabbat. Daf Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Bet. This is a famous Tosafot. Brings the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says, "Bekoshi hitiru lishol b'shlom chavero b'Shabbat." We hardly it's mutar to say Shalom Aleichem on Shabbat. That's not the kedusha of Shabbat. Every word, every gesture, every talk, every thought really matters. He's talking about the Holy of Holies. The Ben Ish Chai says everything you do, a mitzvah that you do on Shabbat is 1,000 folds. You learn 1 hour of Shabbat, it's like 1,000 hours. You divide that, that's almost 40 days back-to-back hours of learning. It's a tremendous thing. It's magnified. Everything is magnified. So therefore you have that. But says the Machzik Bracha, perhaps Shulchan Aruch that doesn't bring this is Cholek. Says the Gedulot Elisha, Rabbi Elisha Dingur, from the Rosh HaRabbanim of Baghdad, then he went to Singapore, has a whole story about him. But he writes in Gedulot Elisha, who says that Maran is Cholek? Why? Because he doesn't bring it in Shulchan Aruch, but he brings it in Bet Yosef. He doesn't repeat everything he says in Bet Yosef in the Shulchan Aruch. So if you don't find that he explicitly disagrees with that, therefore it's, you can assume that he relied on you reading there. Bet Yosef, after all, parenthetically, Maran writes in the Akdama to Bet Yosef, I sometimes say this and people say, we didn't find it, Rabbi. It's the Akdama to the Shulchan Aruch in Choshen Mishpat. Maran wrote Choshen Mishpat later on, for those who have been in Maran's house in Sfat, in the actual area, not the left side of the courtyard, but right in front of the entrance, that's where he actually lived, and his Bet Midrash, his private study is still there. It's a very low, shallow thing. It's a small place that he actually wrote the majority of Shulchan Aruch over there. Choshen Mishpat was written afterwards, because this was after the great earthquake in Sfat, and he moved, whatever. But in Aktabat, Choshen Mishpat writes, the reason I'm writing Shulchan Aruch is for people to have Bet Yosef is long. He wrote the Bet Yosef in Turkey when he was young. He says that's long to review it. You need to be constantly reviewing it. So I'm writing a kitzur. The Shulchan Aruch was really the original kitzur Shulchan Aruch. So since I'm writing this, that every Jew could review it every month. Or Chaim, Yoredah, Choshen Mishpat, you could do it every month this way. It's a kitzur halachot. That's we're happy that if a person in a lifetime has finished Shulchan Aruch, but nevertheless, it says the Gedulot Elisha, if it's not in the Shulchan Aruch, so it doesn't mean that he's disagreeing. He's reversing himself from what he wrote in Bet Yosef. He's relying that you read the Bet Yosef. So therefore, says the Gedulot Elisha, it's not muchach that Maran disagrees with this. If you enjoy speaking about news a little bit on Shabbat, it's okay. And the Ben Ish Chai actually, Ben Ish Chai himself, again talking about today is the Iraqi poskim, right? Talking about the Ben Ish Chai himself brings this heter of the Ramah. So it's not necessarily that Shulchan Aruch disagrees with this Ramah, but perhaps is relying on what he wrote in the name of the Tshuvat Hadeshin in Siman Samach Aleph in Bet Yosef, and you still have that allowance. Now, so this is now the delicate balance that we have to run of what we are willing to speak, what we're not. We understand the Rashbi's Hanhaga. We understand that there are many others that the person can speak about the sources of the Kedushat Shabbat and how special it is. But bare-bone halacha, mikar adin, if you enjoy and it gives you ta'anug, it's mutar to talk about it. That being said, the same thing is what the Mishna Berura over here brings in Sif Katan Gimal, ve'asur lesaper b'Shabbat. You cannot, it's asur to speak on Shabbat as a davar shemista'er bo. And things that give you sar, it's asur to speak about it. Difficulties, catastrophes, things that even if it's in news and it's the hot button topics, it's asur to speak about them if it makes you or other people sad, right? So therefore, you should not be speaking, says the Kafachayim, about reminiscing about your friends that died, and every time you talk about them, it gets you sad. it's people who are, memorializing your sights of their parents, especially in the initial years, that it's very emotional for them, and so on. You don't want to talk about that on Shabbat. You want to read history books even that talk about Holocaust on Shabbat, right? Talk about October 7th on Shabbat. Those are things that lower your spirit and takes away from Orach Shabbat. It's asur to study and to read and to talk about. Even if you're not talking about it, just reading it to yourself, that's not a proper conduct. So it's really both sides of it. You want to do things that are making you happy, so therefore you have even an allowance to do divrei chol a little bit, right? If it makes you happy, and it's chadashot, it's the news, but that also has a flip side, that if something makes you sad, even if it's things that normally would be a mitzvah, it's not something that you want to engage yourself in. I'll end with this, that Chacham Ovadia, in the earlier years, he used to learn Tanakh with his daughters on Friday night, right? A number of daughters, and he would learn with them. And when he would get to, he was a very emotional person, Chacham Ovadia. Every parashat Vayigash, even the emotional parts of the story of Yosef HaTzadik, he would start crying in the shul, at the Kriyat Torah. So when he was learning Tanakh with his girls, some parts Tanakh could be very, very emotional at some parts, and when he got to those parts, he would choke up and say, "I can't read anymore. This is not mutar for me to learn on Shabbat." He gets me sad, so we'll stop, go to skip, go to a different place. So that's something that it has an halachic aspect tucked away over here in Siman Shin Zayin, in Mishna Berura Sif Hatan Gimel, which we spoke about, the Kaf HaChaim and others who say the same thing. So that's really a little encapsulation of what you can and you can't talk about on Shabbat, as Hashem will continue in the days to come.